Not all Vikings had a glorious death. Only a few, mighty warriors, great leaders, and elites, were buried in the earth in a ship. But why a ship? Why not a simple grave or cremation like most commoners? Was the ship more than just a means of transportation? Burying people in a ship was more than a ritual, it was a statement. A final epic engraved into the earth, affirming power, glory, and the desire to continue the journey even after death. Like the pyramids of the Egyptian pharaohs, the Viking ship tombs were more than just burial sites. They were actual ships, long, proud, set adrift, carrying the deceased and everything they needed for the afterlife. Inside, swords, jewelry, pottery, even kitchenware were found, and sometimes sacrificial animals, horses, dogs, even cows, and decapitated and placed beside their owners as if they were to continue serving in the afterlife. Some tombs even contained slaves. They were not just property, they were part of the journey, not of their own volition. There was no standard ritual, there was no Viking pattern for death. Some were cremated, their ashes blown away by the wind. Some were buried intact in mounds. Some tombs were built out of stone to resemble ships. Some used wagons as coffins. Customs varied, even reversed, between two communities less than 50 miles apart. In one part of Sweden, men were buried in ships, women were burned. In another, the opposite was true. Death, for the Vikings, was a communal affair, but the way it was presented reflected the region, the period, and the class. In ancient Scandinavia, roads were a luxury. The rugged mountains, the dense forests, only the sea, the rivers, and the fjords were real roads. For the Vikings, the boat was more than just a means of transportation. It was their home. It was their way to battle. It was the machine that carried them out into the world and back to their ancestors. Terje Leiren, a professor of Norwegian studies, once said, "The fjords and the oceans were the highways of the ancients. Without boats they could not live, so, when they died, why not be buried in the very thing that had been with them all their lives?" Didn't the Vikings need a boat to cross the Nile to the afterlife, just as the Egyptians needed a boat to cross the sea to Valhalla? Boat-shaped tombs have been around since the Stone Age. They can be found in Denmark, Sweden, the Baltic, and even farther afield. Not a legend, but a living belief ingrained in Nordic culture for millennia. In the mid-8th century, a new wave rolled in from the north. The Vikings, now no longer just fishermen or traders, began to expand their reach. They set sail, heading east to the Baltic, then west to Britain and Ireland. Ships were no longer just for survival. They became weapons, symbols of power, thrones on the waves, and then, in death, they became monuments. Not simple little boats, but real ships, over 40 feet long, heavy, majestic, buried as if they were anchored at the intersection of two worlds. These burials were not for everyone. They required careful preparation, massive labor, and inevitably immense wealth. According to archaeologist Knut Pasch, these ship graves were the ultimate display of power. How the elites carved their names into history, not in writing, but in earth, wood, bone, and iron, a ritual not just for death, but a declaration. We were once and we are like no one else. Since the 18th century, strange mounds scattered across Scandinavia have begun to reveal their secrets. With each excavation, the past has emerged from the ground, and sometimes with surprises. As of 2024, at least 26 ship graves have been found in Norway, 7 in Sweden, 6 in the UK, and a few others scattered across Europe, France, Germany, Estonia, and more. By Pasch's definition, A real ship is one that is over 12 meters long, not just a small boat. He estimates that there could be as many as 1,000 ship or boat graves across northern Europe, and not all of them are Viking. Some date back to the Merovingian period, like the legendary ship at Sutton Hoo, England, from the early 600s. It was buried in the typical style of the Swedish Vendel culture, accompanied by an elaborate iron helmet, a near replica of a Norse warrior's helmet. With modern technology such as ground-penetrating radar, archaeologists continue to uncover hidden secrets. In 2018, a new ship grave was discovered in southeastern Norway. At the same time, iron studs, the remains of another ship, lay quietly under the cold earth for thousands of years. The ship is still there. The dead are still there. And each time they are excavated, they tell the story of a world that once lived, fought, and believed in something greater than death. Beneath the frozen Norwegian soil, 2 ships lay dormant for more than 1,000 years. And then, when they were excavated, they were not just wrecks. They were shrines of memory. The Oseberg, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Inside, archaeologists found 2 women. No one knew who they were, queens, shamans, only that they were buried with unprecedented reverence. Beds, blankets, clothes, shoes, tents, kitchen utensils, hairbrushes, even sledges, carved wooden animals, a tapestry, and 15 beheaded horses, 6 dogs, 2 cows, a ceremony not for ordinary people, but for someone who had entered the legend. And the Gokstad, a large, powerful ship, was the resting place of a warrior. The man had died in battle, his shin bone was severed, his body was covered with spear and sword wounds, and around him there were shields, hooks, beds, chessboards, tents, and strange animals, horses, dogs, hawks, and even peacocks, brought from distant lands. It was not just death, it was a journey. A long journey to the place the Vikings called Valhalla. A Viking grave is more than just a burial place for a person. It is a miniature universe where the living try to take with them everything the dead will need in the afterlife. In the belly of those ships, archaeologists found all sorts of things. Swords, axes, helmets to continue fighting, jewelry, gold and silver to prove their status. Household items, kitchen utensils, chessboards, hairbrushes, so that there is no shortage in the afterlife. Horses, dogs, hunting birds, faithful companions, and then there are things that not everyone dares to look directly at. Slaves, killed, then buried. In some graves, traces remain. Mutilated human bones, female bodies with traces of violence, like in the Oseberg ship. A clear message. The deceased did not travel alone. In 922, the Arab envoy Ahmad ibn Fadlan witnessed a gruesome funeral ceremony of the Rus, the descendants of the Vikings in the Volga region. A female slave was sacrificed after days of being raped and drugged, and finally killed and burned with her master's ship. A brutal ritual, but also a reminder of the Vikings' deep belief. Death is not the end, it is the gateway to another world. 10th century. The Viking sails slowly died down, and with them the ship burials, once symbols of power, faith, and death, began to die out. It was not a collapse in battle, it was a change from a new faith. The Vikings gradually embraced Christianity. And the new religion did not approve of human burning, slave sacrifice, or burial in great ships. Instead, the dead were to be buried in consecrated cemeteries. No more mounds, no more boats, no more sacrificial animals, just plain coffins and crosses. The ships, once symbols of life and death, were now mere ghosts in the ground, silent, buried. But if you ever set foot in Norway, Sweden, or England, if you ever step over a mossy mound, stop and listen. Who knows, beneath your feet there may be a ship, and in that deep darkness a warrior or a queen is still drifting, silently drifting towards the other side of the world.